Hi folks, welcome back to Cretacea Park and the Bearpaw Forest exhibit. We're going to look at the visitors section for this one. We'll start with a speed build and the building of the component element of the visitors viewing center. It's intended to be circular and go around more or less following the path that's laid out. Although I did discover that the path did not make a very good circle, so I had to replace it. That's not in the video here, though. Uh, so multiple elements are making up the slice of this building, and it's something that gave me a bit of trouble in doing it. The making circular buildings can be kind of a little cranky at the moment in PK, and it doesn't always rotate well off the center of the combined buildings. I had to end up using an old trick of putting a column in the center of it to give it a clear center to work around. And yeah, you can see by duplicating things and inadvertently and stuff, there were a number of problems. So we have a jump cut here to the completed round building, and I've even taken out a couple of the wall panels so that, as you saw, guests can enter the structure. The path has been replaced by this point, and it's a pretty good match. I may have to do something else in the future. Now on the habitat side, I don't want it to look like the normal building. I want the windows down lower so the guests can see out into the habitat, and make them taller so it's more of a vista. And that looks good. So there's a big hole in the middle, and I really should have dealt with this when I had easy access to the path. But I didn't, so you're getting to see me work around it. I'm making a circle with glass arcs and concrete walls, dropping the walls down to the glass level and expanding it out a little bit so that they occupy the same space, and then working to get the entire thing the size of the hole in the center of the path, and also to get it centered on that path. It was a little fussy, and with it being under the roof already, it just made it a little bit harder than it needed to be. So I'm lowering it down and trying to guess what would be the right height. So I found myself waiting to have a guest come walking by to use it for a scale. Decided that wasn't quite good enough, so called up a bench to use, because the idea is to get this glass panel at bench height. So select the whole thing again and drop it down to bench height. Having gotten that in place, I then foolishly decided to put the dome on the top of the building rather than finish working with that thing, just because I wanted to make it even harder for myself. I started by creating a dome and then enlarging it and fitting it into the hole in the center of the building. And once I did that, duplicated it and gave it a hexagonal symmetry for the arches, which I kind of liked. The building didn't look quite finished enough to me, so I decided it needed some support. Part of that was there's a slight gap in the roof pieces. You can see that they didn't quite come together. So I'm going to use this support to give a little panache to the building while at the same time hiding that gap. There we go. And then bring it over to the other side, spin it around, and slide it to where it will be filling the gap on that side. And then I can take the two of them since they're only two pieces, they behave pretty well. Take two of them, duplicate them, and just spin them around using the set angle to fill those gaps all the way around. It does make the top of the building look a little bit like a flying saucer, but it would look less so if it wasn't quite so black and sinister, I think. And again, as always, recoloring will probably change that. So I had put a solar panel there to power this immediate area in the park. And what I really wanted to do is take it to the roof. And we can't do that yet. So I built up the ground and placed it on top of the ground at approximately rooftop height with the restroom here. Because I wanted to build a facility building to go with the viewing building, and decided I wanted to theme it in with the roof of the restroom. So you see me here trying to size a concrete flat piece to the same size as the sections in that roof. It's going to turn out not to matter. So I probably could have done this whole thing with less pieces. But it'll be fine. So duplicating sections till I get a full length, and then duplicating a length and making it a little bit wider. The object here is to get the length long enough to connect with the viewing building, because I want to set up a small area in there which would let guests, in theory, enter the accommodation building without leaving the pavilion. So you can see I built a set of roof elements under the solar panel, brought them over, and then playing with getting the height right with regard to the extant building. And I've inadvertent duplicates again. Needed to make those go away. So I can take that whole block and create the entire roof for this building. But I don't want the entire roof. I want that L shape, and because I want to show off the access to the behind the scenes stuff behind the restroom. And I need to have stairs to get up to the solar panel. And I suspect it long term will pay off to have stairs that are on the outside that a mechanic can go up there to fix. So playing with the roof, I discovered that I could get it set above the restroom roof but below the trim to give some interest to the surface. It doesn't have all the features of the extra stuff on the roof that I would have liked. And someday when we get those kind of props to be able to trick that out, I would envision coming back and doing just that with this building. So I'm building out a new edge trim for this building. It's slightly bigger than the one that it came with because in part I want a wall around the edge to keep things from rolling off. If there's any work. But I liked those lines showing from the restroom, so I added some to it. You can see the stairs are already in place, single width for workmen. And now I'm going to play with putting building walls in for what amounts to an extension of the restroom. So naturally the same base wall underneath. And there's a lot of fussing with this. Getting scales right, getting the corners straightened up, but that's okay. It's a thing you have to do sometimes, particularly when you're doing your builds off the cuff or basing it on a square that's not the standard grid, like those little blocks that made up the roof. So you're not going to see me do a lot of work on that little bit of the building that's inside the viewing pavilion, short of setting up the wall. Again, I continue to have technical and memory issues. I do builds before I before I remember to turn on the recorder. Uh, so there's a certain amount of this that's being made up as I decide something looks good or it seems to be working or not working. And some of that has to do with that wall that I put in that's closer to the walk. Um, we'll come back to that shortly. Putting in uh, foundation cement, and it'll all have to be fit to the right lengths and have the right standoff from the wall. And this is what it led to. I decided originally I would put a garden along this run, and you'll see that misplaced piece of concrete will come into play there. To do that, so I built the mulch and everything, and subsequently decided that no, I wanted to make this a little more interactive as a building. So some of this work gets torn out even before the usual reflection after a build about what could be better, what could be different, what might work to sell the concept a little bit better, all those kind of things. So I'm going to be adding windows, and I wanted them to echo the windows on the restrooms. So, size the window to that and then lace them in. Because I'm still expecting at this point to see a garden there. It's just windows all along the way. And I'll use that spacing in duplicating it to bring it through to the other side and have spacing on the other side. I would envision that this extension would have a gift shop in it. That's where I got to eventually and decided I needed to open up where I put the garden. But all the windows make sense for a gift shop, and we'll get to that. So right now I'm still playing with tuning up the building shell and getting things just right. It's not a terribly sophisticated building, and I don't. It doesn't need to be, particularly from the back. That little green blur was after I had changed my mind. I put an information building inside the structure as a draw to the guests to bring them in and make it look active, even though it's not actually a gift shop. I want the appearance of activity rather than actually income from a gift shop. So I had to revise the garden to leave a path to the information center. I'm not sure what I can do about the door. I don't know yet whether guests will walk through modular doors or not. I suspect not, since all modular things are the same in terms of stopping them, as long as they're upright enough. Just don't know how to hide the fact that it's an information center rather than a gift shop. So trying to give it a little bit of a flair like a gift shop would have in terms of its setting there. And putting the window in horizontally was my first attempt at setting up for some signage. I had an idea that I could use the alphabet letters on this, and then the light, when the light eventually comes, it would shine through them and silhouette them in the dark or something, and decided that probably wasn't going to cut it. So I changed the base for the sign and decided to use this canopy instead. And what I will ultimately end up doing, I think, is when colorable letters come in, the letters will get colored, and I'll let that handle the contrast. For some reason, this one was fussier than it should have been, and it just took a while. And when I start getting the letters in there, I'm going to speed up the the video, and because you don't need to see me placing all those letters one at a time and fussing with them. Still hoping the devs will make an easier replacement for the letters there. So you can just duplicate one and then swap a letter out, and it will retain the formatting that you've given it. Because we can scale the letters, that's great. It may not be something they can do to make it retain that that formatting, in which case we'll just have to suffer through. So this is the Bearpaw exhibit. So this gift shop will be the Bearpaw Bounty. I couldn't cudgel my brain into coming up with anything more clever for a title. I'm hoping that in the future we will get some props that can be used, like some of the ones in Planet Zoo, to be able to dress this out a little bit, and maybe, you know, have some displays outside the building that help sell this as a gift shop rather than what it actually is. So yeah, since we can't retain the formatting, anytime you can steal an already formatted letter to do your words is a big plus as far as I'm concerned. So I knew I wanted it to be Bearpaw. Didn't know it was going to be Bounty for a while. Alliteration is a thing, right? Aparo apparel. It seems to be a Prehistoric Kingdom thing. And it was longer than I wanted it to be. And when you're doing the letters like this, you often end up discovering that they're not going to turn out to be sized to fit the space you've got for them. So you end up selecting them all again and changing their size. Yeah, there we go. Okay, back to more serious building. So the last part of the building was tricking out that stairway because you can't just have stairs floating in the air. And I tried something different with the slat wall stuff, but couldn't figure out how to get it to play nice and have a gradual height change. If we had had a triangular element set for those slats, it would have been a no-brainer. I could have done it. So I changed to the metal plank walls for the flank, and now I'm dropping in a metal railing to provide a handrail to the mechanics as they go up the stairs. I'm going to do it in two parts and leave a gap just so it's a little different. And once I've done one set, I can do the other set and swing it over, unless I inadvertently delete it and have to do it again. So what's next? What's next is a lot of tidying up, as is common in these buildings, particularly once you get off the grid or change the size of elements. There's a lot of fussy work that needs to be done in order to have your build look sharp. So watch me do that. That's, yeah, there's the connector into the building from inside, and you can see a glimpse of what I did in that central space. I had a problem tree inside my building, so a little bit of landscaping, and we're going to run around doing a little landscape catch-up in the habitat because I'm in this section of it where I didn't spend a lot of attention when I was doing the main build. So come back and do it, blend a few things, and bring some rocks and some bushes in to blend the building a little more into the habitat. And more landscaping in that central area. At this point, I hadn't made the decision to put the habitat in there. I was just trying to make it look a little bit more interesting. Um, and It was going to be dead space, and I was going to save that for some other time. Uh, but a bunch of this stuff that was laid down with the brush ended up encroaching on the path, and that had to go. And the rock walls, keeping the animals in, wouldn't do much to keep the people out. So it was time to add a wall. And I'm using the habitat fencing concrete wall, the low one, a little fussy bit there, using the low one to run along here. I'm trying by eye to have the pieces about the same length. I thought it might be interesting to break it up with the rock there. And got reminded right there that I got plants coming through where this wall is going to be. Now I've taken this further than the habitat itself because I realized the bridge comes right up to a chasm too, and we don't want our guests accidentally falling into that, so I had to make sure there was a wall there to keep them from doing that. So cleaning up a bunch of stuff and stubborn plants that don't want to be deleted. Yeah, it's gone. And I decided I didn't like that gap. So bridge it with wall and a little bit of adjustment of the rock, and there we go. Now there's no splash coming into this divided path where you go toward the Bearpaw exhibit on one side or continue on to the park to the alternate entrance to the Bearpaw exhibit. So I decided to put in a sort of eye-catching feature to make it clear that there's a divide there, and essentially force guests to do it rather than have them cut across it, and decided to back it up with some bamboo, in part to make it look more interesting and also to cut the sight line between the beginnings of the two paths. And that led me to come back to the bridge on the other side because there's a chasm there too. So trim it up a little bit with some rocks and set it up to keep guests from going into the river, which we don't want them to do. It's bad for publicity. You get a bunch of wet guests and probably some lawsuits. So I'm going to build a rocky area here to prevent them from going through, and it'll be right by the path here at the bridge proper, but it'll fade into the woods a little bit further away when people are going to be less tempted to come back and jump in the river. So I'm going to, take a look around and see what I can see in the setup here, make sure it looks attractive, preferably in both directions. And this is actually where I saw the gap that it told me I needed to do something to make sure people didn't go off path and head for the river. So minimal rockage, stretching them out to do the job. The plants are concealing a lot of that, so it'll still look decent. And I also decided I needed to tune up the bridge a little bit. So that was something I added to this video, and making it a little bit more of a scissors truss bridge for support, and add that visual thing on top as a counterbalance to the stresses on the bridge. You will discover later that by pulling those two spars up to connect the top elements of the bridge, I didn't duplicate it first. Oops. And I didn't notice that until after I had widened them, because it looked like they needed that for that function up there. And it's like, oh well, duplicate them, bring them back down. And I decided to leave it wide, even so, and pull it out and connect it to the end posts. But that meant my don't fall through the bridge wire just wasn't tall enough, so obviously I had to go back in and make sure it filled the gap between the railing and the bed of the bridge. So also I wasn't happy with the level that the bridge sat at relative to the paths on either side, so I decided to add an element that would conceal that a little bit more, which is sort of a bumper ramp up, and it needs to be wide enough, and I can duplicate it to the other side, but the other side is at a slightly different height. So besides moving it into place, I need a little bit of extension. It has to be a little bit wider, and it has to have a slight angle. I don't mind a little bit of that uneven path coming up on it. I'd love these paths to be gravel rather than brown asphalt, but it is what it is, and the gravel would look even more convincing. So doing a little bit now of a teaser to where things will be going, and setting a path to the unknown. Now, a short look at what I built in this one, a slideshow at first of several scenes from around it, and then a walk past the new enclosure where, oh, well, there's a sleeping place, and there's an animal. It's Styracosaurus again. He's a relatively small animal for a dinosaur, at least habitat animal dinosaur, and people can see him closer. So we've got the pond in the viewing pavilion, a couple of lambeosaurs out there across the river, and great views from in there. And zoom up, get a look at the whole thing, and I'll leave you with a couple of walking Styracosaurs as we head out. Like it if you did, subscribe if you want to, and I, like the Styracosaur, I'm heading out of here. Come back again. See you in another video.